Hello and welcome back to the Elements of Deep Sea Mining. I'm Eric Young. Stig-Morten Knutsen is Chief Geologist for the Norwegian Offshore Directorate. He's a Vice Chair of the UN Expert Group on Resource Management and a member of the UN Commission on the Limits of the Continental Shelf. In these roles, he wrestles with the large and uncomfortable questions of resource management, and I asked him to bring that perspective to deep sea mining, how he sees the uncertainties, the risks, and the trade-offs when viewed through decades of experience in the resource world.
I don't need to expose myself to uncertainty. I don't need to expose myself to the risk of jumping off a cliff. I don't need that. Somebody needs that, but I don't need that. But when it gets to these bigger decisions on resource extraction or seabed mineral activity, there is also, of course, an uncertainty, and there is a risk to it. And I acknowledge that, and everybody does. But the big question is, how much risk are you willing to take in order to investigate or to mitigate the uncertainty?
We also dig into the state and history of Norway's deep sea mining process. So if you're interested in how Norway is trying to balance its offshore legacy with a new frontier, and in what it takes to move the global conversation forward without collapsing into polarization, then stick around for my conversation with Stig-Morten Knutsen. Stig-Morten, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so let's just start with kind of a main message. What's the most important thing to say about the deep sea mining conversation at this stage?
I think the deep sea mining is one of the discussions, and it really sort of maybe is the tip of the iceberg for many discussions when it comes to resource management or resource use. And I think the question we all should ask ourselves is, do we really want to know where all our resources comes from, how they are explored and exploited? And if you do, or if you don't, how much uncertainty and risk are you willing to take or to change your perception or your understanding of that resource management system? So that is, in many ways, that could be a little bit abstract, but it's sort of, why are we doing what we are doing, not only in terms of seabed minerals or mining, as you call it, but it all goes to energy, it goes to fish, it goes to hydropower, it goes to whatever. And that is sort of a bigger picture. And in many ways, the seabed minerals or seabed mining pins into that, because minerals and metals are part of almost whatever we do in our world, not only the modern world, but it goes way back. Everybody knows that since 2,000-3,000 years before our current timing. So it's a big one, and I think it's a fascinating one, because seabed mining takes all of this into itself and into the discussions that we are having or not having.
Yeah, no, I totally agree that seabed mining is interesting in it's a very kind of crystalline case of a lot of issues that we're facing in other resource industries and in a bunch of areas of economics and society in general. So let's just start giving the listener an idea who you are. So you wear a lot of different hats, and maybe you can just introduce your various positions and what you do.
Yeah, well, I am. I used to say I am what I am. I'm a geologist as a background, and I also have a degree in psychology, and I'll get a little bit maybe back to that. But right now, yeah, right now I'm Chief Geologist with the Norwegian Offshore Directorate, which is a governmental body sort of doing the resource management for offshore areas in Norway on the Norwegian Continental Shelf. And those areas that we have our key sort of interest in is within oil and gas. That shouldn't be necessary to say almost, but also within CCS and also within seabed mineral activity, as we call it. And I'm been involved with all of that. Right now, I'm mainly involved with seabed mining or seabed minerals, and also with CCS.
CCS is carbon capture and storage.
Sorry, it is, yes. And also I've been involved with offshore wind, I've been involved with offshore aquaculture, I've been involved with, I shouldn't say anything that has to do with the shelf, but that's sort of my main daytime job. And then I have a few other hats, and that you alluded to. And one of them is that I'm also a member of the Commission on the Limits of the Continental Shelf, as it's called. That's a very formal title, but that's a UN system governmental part sitting in New York, where we're actually looking on different countries' applications to extend their continental shelves. And again, that the reason for that is, of course, that many countries are looking at different types of resources that could be on the continental shelf. So that's one of the key issues for that one.
Is that under Is that under
That's under
organizing framework?
UNCLOS. Yeah, that's under the
Okay.
United Nations Convention Law of the Sea. And the other part of that is also under the UNCLOS is, as I think you had talked about a bit earlier, and we might get into it, that's the ISA, the International Seabed Authority. There is someone else from the Norwegian Offshore Directorate sitting in the ISA.
Okay.
In addition to that, I have another UN hat, to put it that way, and that is that I'm Norway's representative in something called the Expert Group on Resource Management. And that is also a UN body sitting in Geneva under the UNECE. There's a lot of abbreviations, and I'm sorry for that. But what we really are looking at in that expert group is sort of how can we do resource management within the frameworks, especially of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. So those are two of the UN positions I kind of hold or represent. And in addition to that, I also have had, I'm not currently, but I have had a professor at a position at the University of Tromsø, where I have given courses and supervised sort of what we are discussing here. How do you do resource management?
I can't even manage to have minor podcast and
I think you're doing good. I think you're doing good, Eric.
Job at the same time. Just before we get, I want to hear kind of how you got there a little bit, but just explain a little bit more about what the Offshore Directorate's role is. I think that for people who follow the Norwegian deep sea mining conversation a little bit, it sometimes feels like the Offshore Directorate has a mandate to get deep sea mining going. And so I just want to hear kind of what their official position is and how we should kind of parse that.
Yeah, we do not have a mandate to get deep sea mining, or again, what we call deep sea mineral activity. And we haven't gotten to the mining stage at all in Norway, and we'll get to that, I guess. But we are a governmental body, but we are very formally, we're a technical advisor to the ministry, to the energy ministry, which has been giving the authority in terms of deep sea mineral activity to run that part or the legal part of that one. So we are merely a technical body. I shouldn't say we are just doing what we are being told, but we are the one that are looking after the resource management part of what the politicians and the ministry have decided.
Interesting.
And then we have a set of rules and regulations and so on, so that we follow. But very formally, we are not the one that put the politics or so in effect. That's what the ministry does, and we are just boots on the ground, if you want to put it that way, that follow what comes from the authorities in, well, main parts in Oslo then.
And so one of the roles of the Offshore Directorate is to gather information. You guys participate in cruises to find out what's actually out there within Norway's extended economic zone and try to quantify the potential minerals, etc.
That is correct. And so what we have done since the last 10 years or something, and then been increased amount of budgeting the last few years, is to try to map both the resources but also the environmental part of it. And then there's big discussions on that, which we also might get into. But at least that's sort of what we do. And we do go out there. I've been out there months myself doing the mapping and doing the acquisition and doing the sampling and so and so. And another really important part of that is that we are making all of these data available to the public. And that is sort of part of what we call the Norwegian model. And that's also what we have been doing in terms of oil and gas and also carbon capture and so and so. All the data that could be made publicly available without sort of stepping over some business issues or whatever, they are made public for the common good.
Yeah. Okay, well, then let's back up a second, because I want to understand, first of all, how someone gets to have so many high-level positions all at once, and also how a degree in psychology fits in. So just briefly, how did you get to be a geologist, and how did you get through psychology to a chief geologist and UN positions?
Yeah, I guess the sort of the starting point is that I've always been, I'm a big fan of the outdoors, and I always love the nature and the mountains and the seas, and I still try to do a lot of outdoors activities. And one thing that always sort of intrigued me is, why does nature look like nature does? Why is that mountain there? Why is that lake? And why is that river? And so and so. And try to put, I guess it's the big why. Why is things the way they are?
Mm-hmm.
I shouldn't say why do the water run downwards, but it's sort of, I guess that's the starting point. And then sort of I started to realize that, well, there is actually some parts of the scientific community that tries to link these together, and that is geography or geology and so on and so on. So I guess that was the starting point. I never thought about I started with oil and gas as many other did in Norway when you are a geologist, but that's not sort of my starting point. The starting point was, I guess, the curiosity about nature. And I guess that also links me back to the other question you had, why psychology?
Yeah.
And that is, in my view, it's kind of obvious, because that's another question. Why are people the way people are? So, and then if you sort of interact people and geology and so, then you get sort of, I guess, maybe what we are getting close to. Why do we act like we do in terms of resource management or discussions, and in this case, seabed minerals and etc.
Yeah. Well, I think that seabed minerals is a fascinating point of intersection between human psychology and
I think it is. Yeah.
Geography, geology. Absolutely.
Mm.
Then, okay, so update us on the Norwegian situation. So, yeah, for the listener who is, I think about 25% of the listenership to this podcast is Norwegian. So, for those of you who are less interested in the Norwegian situation, sit tight. We're going to talk about a lot of the concepts around deep sea mining and how we can improve the conversation around deep sea mining. But first, Stig-Morten, if you can just kind of update us on what's going on in Norway. There's just been an election, and we're wondering how that's going to affect the status of deep sea mining decision making. But also, I think just kind of if you can give your perception of the development of deep sea minerals regulation in Norway so far. I think that's also helpful. People have different perceptions of how this process has happened and even where we stand right now. So let's hear yours.
Yeah. So very formally, what I think, I don't know where to start, if you want to start with today or 10 years or 15, 20 years back. But what is sort of the status right now is that the ministry a year back or so, a little bit more than a year back, announced the first concession round for potential seabed mineral activity. And we might talk about semantics and so and so. But that's sort of what was announced. I think it was before summer or about summer last year.
Mm-hmm.
And that licensing round was, of course, prepared by the ministry and by us on a technical level. And then you had some maps and we had some areas, and maybe get back to that later on. But that concession round did not come through because there was political decisions when it came to the discussions about the national budget for this year. And that discussion took place last fall. And then one of the parties that sort of supported the overall national budget says that if we want to going to support the national budget, we will have to stop or postpone the seabed mineral activity concession round. So that's where we are. We and the ministry were ready to put forward the areas. They were out there. You could see map. You can find them wherever you want if you want to browse and so and so. So now we don't know actually what is happening, because it is, of course, a political decision to put forward a concession round. Mm-hmm. And now, as you also mentioned and we both touched upon, there has been an election in Norway. What will be the composition of the new parliament? We know the composition, but we don't know who will be talking and marrying who on that parliament or in that parliament. So what it comes out of that and how the political landscape will be, I guess nobody knows. Maybe someone close to the prime minister knows, but we'll just have to wait and see. So right now, we were ready to put forward a concession round. That did not go forward, and it's still sort of I shouldn't say in limbo, but it's awaiting the political process that will have to go forward after the parliament has come together after the election now.
And as far as you know, that concession process hasn't changed. If it starts back up, it will be similar to what was kind of proposed a year ago now.
More or less, I guess. We haven't. Well, we have gathered more data, we have more knowledge, but sort of what was the foundation prior to that concession round a year ago is more or less the same as today, with maybe some small nuances and so, but not any big ones.
And I think it's important to then put some details on the concession round, because I think this is something that is scary to people when they first see a map of the Norwegian, what is that, the Greenland Sea? with this huge kind of orange line around it that says this is the area that we're opening to seabed mineral activity. And so, yeah, explain a little bit of the details of what concessioning will mean. And yeah, semantics is absolutely appropriate here because I think that was one of the things that stumbled the Norwegian process.
So if you now go a little bit back, and then sort of we more than 20 years ago, the Norwegian Offshore Directorate, which was then the Norwegian Petroleum Directorate, started mapping, especially on the Jan Mayen area, and also there was a lot of scientific cruises, especially from the University of Bergen and elsewhere, started mapping and investigating the deep seas, not necessarily for minerals or metals, but actually understanding what is out there in terms of geology and the seabed, the spreading ridge, and all of the geology stuff, to put it that way. And then we also started to realize that there actually could be some types of resources, being metals or minerals. So what we have done is, through the years, together with different academic institutions, we have done the mapping of that area that you are indicating, which is big or not big, or it is a significant area of the Norwegian Greenland Sea, but that is sort of the area we have investigated. So that's the big one, the really big one. And that was kind of open to investigations. And then based on that, we, together with the ministry, tried to sort of pinpoint and maybe high grade, where is it, if you are looking for metals and minerals, and if you want to explore further, where is it within that big area that you could actually look for these metals and minerals? And then came up that, I don't know if you remember, a yellow area, which is a smaller area. And that is the area that was put forward as an area for any interest or companies to, if the concession round was going forward, to apply for a license within that yellow area. And then if the concession round were to go ahead, there will be concessions within that yellow area. We are not certain how big a concession will be or a license will be. That could be 1 times 1 or 2 times 2 or 3 times 3 kilometers. That has not been decided. So within that big area that we open up and investigated, we narrow it down to, which is usually a yellow area, which is a smaller area. And with it, then again, there could be licenses awarded to interests or companies or parties that apply for a license within that, if there is going to be a licensing round.
Right. And so within this area that's been open for potential concessions, it's not necessarily that all of that area is going to be awarded in licenses.
That is correct. And of course, I can't say what is going to be awarded, because that we have to see who is applying and if there is anyone applying and what they are applying for and so and so. I think it's just to put it in a little bit context. Everybody's saying that the area that is out there for grabs, as usually someone says, that you could apply for. They say it's huge, it's big, and then comes that phrase, is out for grab. That area is actually smaller than the first concession round when it came to petroleum in Norway in 1965. So yeah, it might look big, but depending what you compare it to, of course. And I think that's very important. I think it's highly unlikely, I shouldn't say impossible, that all of that is going to be awarded to anyone. There are going to be small pitches, and how big those pitches are going to be, we don't know yet. We'll have to see.
Okay, so companies apply, they say, okay, we're interested in this particular area. We want to have a license to do activity. Let's talk about what activity means, and then what they kind of get granted permission to do, assuming that you're up on all of these details.
And that again follows a little or quite a lot, depending on how you want to view it, but it follows a little bit the same sort of procedure that we have within oil and gas. If they do get a license, if they do apply and they do get a license, they will also get a work program. And that work program is to mitigate further risk for whatever they are doing within that license area. It all sort of comes down to that we want companies to investigate and do what we call a stepwise approach towards exploration. And then maybe exploitation, but that's further down the line.
Is that work program established? So one of the things that I think about this process is, this is modeled on the oil and gas process, and I think that has caused a few stumbles in perceptions, because people say things like, well, no one has ever turned down an oil and gas exploitation application. And I imagine that one of the big differences is in that oil and gas, there are established norms and processes and we kind of know what forms you have to fill in and what boxes you have to tick and what research you have to do before you make an application. Whereas in seabed minerals, I imagine that's all still being determined. So when you say there's a work program, is that still kind of to be determined what that work program will consist of?
That's always to be determined. That's also still to be determined for each potential petroleum license that is awarded. And I've been part of that for many years, the technical part of awarding licenses. And each license is unique in many ways, and each license has its special risks and uncertainties. And the whole point with the work program is to mitigate those risks and uncertainties. And there's a difference in uncertainty on area A, B, or C, and D, and that's the same thing that will be for potential licenses when it gets to mineral activities. So there is not sort of a standard set of work program, not for petroleum and not for minerals and not for CCS or whatever else there is, not even for offshore wind. So everybody, and that's sort of, I think that's sort of, every license is unique. Every license has its own problems, to put it that way, its own uncertainties, and that's the one you will try to mitigate through that work program. And to everyone who says that, well, nobody has turned down, I shouldn't say I have turned down, but when the steps from being awarded a license within petroleum, it's a long step. It's a 10-year period usually that you have an initial period that you need to mature the area through technical steps and so and so. And if you're not doing those technical steps, you're not moving ahead. And that's never gets into the papers, of course, because that's really just the way it is. And if the company or the big industry player or whatever doesn't follow that, well, then it's halted.
Yeah, so by the time they make an application, they've already done a 10-year process and they've...
Well, a maximum of 10 years. They could do it in 2 years or 3 years, that depends. But there is sort of a frame for that. And there is a stepwise approach for acquiring seismic, sampling, etc.
So there's a survivorship bias to that process. By the time you get to the end of it, then you're likely to be successful.
Or, and that's another part, or you relinquish and say, no, this was not what I thought it was.
Mm-hmm.
And the area goes back to the state or to the crown, as they call it somewhere.
And so then with these concessions, the idea is a company will apply for a concession. We want to investigate this particular area. It ends up being however big, 3 square kilometers. And then they get kind of exclusive rights to do exploration work in that area, to gather the data that they might need to in the future do exploitation. And if they get to that step, then they get a kind of a first rights to apply for the exploitation there.
Yep, that's right. And then comes that I shouldn't say snag, but I think you mentioned it in your podcast before, and it's written in the white paper that the first potential exploitation license will have to go back to the parliament to be sort of checked out and decided. So there is a sort of I shouldn't say a stop sign, but a potential stop sign along the way for those ones as well. And I know that, and then comes probably the argument from the flip side that, well, that has never happened, but at least that is a stop sign if you want to apply it or if the parliament wants to apply it.
Do you have any, you're probably not allowed to comment too much on this, but in terms of what could have been done differently, what could have been done better to make this smoother, the thing that people have mentioned before to me is, well, yeah, we could have gotten the semantics better. If they had, instead of using the word activity, had said, okay, here we're opening for exploration, been very clear about that, I sometimes feel like we would have had less pushback. But how do you imagine this could go better how do you imagine this could go better?
Yeah, I don't know how much I can comment on. I guess and that maybe comes back to sort of the fundamental discussions about seabed mineral activity. If you are really opposed to it, you can dig into semantics, or you can dig into whatever, and you can say, well, you should have done that, you should have done that, and whatever you do, it's not gonna help. So I don't know how much use or effort I want to put into discussing the semantics, because it kind of is what it is, and we are where we are, and then we have to look for how we are treating this going forward. And
yeah,
sometimes I find it fascinating what we really want to discuss and how we are digging into. I shouldn't say that it doesn't really matter, but yeah, there are of course ways that could be done better or differently, but I guess that's life. That's always the case with everything. This one as well.
About this. Oh, well, say more about that. Where do you see people are digging into things? Where do you see the attention of people is getting hung up in the conversation.
And I guess that's, and I think that is what really intrigues me, is that you find some, I shouldn't say everybody, I should, because if I say everybody, then I'm doing exactly what I'm trying to get away from. But I say we have it, and I guess that's a human. I don't know if the psychologist that kicks in, but that's a human part. We find our sort of area of interest, and that's the one we dig into, and that's the one we want to pick.
Mm-hmm.
And then we kind of shape our perception the way it fits our comfortably numb perception of the way we want it and believe it to be. And that's sort of, and I think that's fascinating. That's what I said in the beginning. How much risk or how much uncertainty are you willing to take to dig yourself out of your rabbit hole?
Yeah. So people who have a tendency to focus on one aspect. I mean, this I think is, someone else has described to me how much deep sea mining conversation is a Rorschach test, because you can see in it kind of whatever you want in the big narratives of society, whether this is a kind of the next golden opportunity for progress, whether this is avoiding getting a kind of minerals and things that we need for the energy transition, whether this is the next case of humanity rushing in and destroying a pristine environment that we don't know enough about. You can see everything there.
And also I think it is when you want to dig into those details about what does it look like? Are there fish? Are there corals? Are there not corals? And also some of your other visitors before, there is a big difference between what is happening in Norway and the subsurface and the geology in Norway and elsewhere, and also when it gets to the social environmental side in general. So there are so many facets, if you want to use that word. There are so many parts of it, and they are so different from wherever you are that it's really hard to make a sort of a one statement about seabed mineral activity or seabed mining globally. So there are many parts of this that sort of, and not everybody, many wants to pick their part of it.
Well, then, maybe put on your hat resources more generally for a moment. So I'm interested always in the resource curse and how Norway is always held out as an example of the nation that somehow avoided it. And so I'm interested in your take on why you think Norway has been successful being a resource-based economy where a lot of other countries haven't, and just, I guess, where you think the places to focus are for other countries to follow in Norway's kind of steps. Like, where do you see the best gains being made in terms of managing resources, and then more specifically on seabed minerals, how we manage this new industry to also not fall into these problems? Small question.
That's a big one, and it has been discussed quite a lot. As part of my position at the University of Tromsø, that was what I tried to dig a little bit into. But there has been many sort of theories why did we Norway manage it, and actually most countries that has a lot of resources have not managed it. And I haven't done all that much work on it myself, but I can refer to some of that work. And I think some of the really sort of fundamental part of it is the trust. So the system in Norway, and everybody's saying that, and it was said in the election, and sort of the key thing we have in Norway is that we trust each other, and we trust the government, not at least, we trust the government. And then we can discuss whether that is still, but that, and so and also when we discovered oil in the late 60s, Norway, everybody say Norway was poor and it was so and so, but it wasn't all that poor, to put it that way. But what was really important prior to the oil and gas story in Norway was that we already had a lot of resources within fish, within timber. I guess everybody, if you go back, everybody has heard the Beatles song, Norwegian wood. So and we were a big sort of nation when it came to shipping, and we still are in many ways. So we didn't kind of start from scratch on the industry part, and we didn't start from scratch on the technology part, because we had a lot of shipping industries. We built ships, we fixed them, and etc. And that is also sort of, I'm sitting in northern Norway in Harstad, and that was one of the reasons why there was established a petroleum environment, if you want to put it that way, in Harstad, because that was an old shipping or werft town. So that's part of the story. But what I really think is important is that trust thing, that we actually trust that the government are doing the best with all those monies that we do get from, well, so far from oil and gas mainly then. And then we'll see if that is something that continues. But I think that's what we see. I shouldn't say globally, and I should be careful about commenting on politics. But if you tear down that trust, then I think we all have issues, and we all will be in trouble.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think people who listen to this podcast hear me talk about trust a lot. It comes up a lot in the deep sea mining conversation from different angles, and it does seem to be, I don't know, at risk more and more in various places. What do you think in Norway? Is it so? Yeah, is the trust piece getting more difficult here, but more so? It's been pointed out to me that a lot of the controversy, a lot of the pushback around deep sea mining rollout, the pushback to opening for minerals activity, kind of comes from a place of mistrust. If you listen to what people are really saying, they're kind of arguing for the same thing. We want to get more information before we proceed to anything that resembles mining. Nobody disagrees on that. What seems to be the problem is that people don't trust that it's going to happen that way, that once we give somebody some power, that they're going to use it in a way that we can trust.
Yeah, no, I agree to your question, or that is and very much so when it gets to the environmental side of it, and part of it which you have touched upon before also when it gets to the resource side of it is sort of how much can we trust whatever comes out of it. And it also comes down to a lot which science, or who are delivering the science and the, I don't want to call it proof because there are no proof in science. It's just theories being tested continuously. But anyways, who are delivering the data that we are to discuss when we are moving forward? Is it the industry or is it the academic? And who's from the academic? And is it from the one that you have bought or not bought? And who have granted the programs and et cetera, et cetera. But that's why I don't sure how I can. What I try to do when it gets to that trust thing, and what we try to do when it gets to the trust or to the openness, is what I also shortly alluded to, and that was that we try to put all the data we gather and all what we are making out in the public. And of course, then we put the heads on our blocks as well, because everybody can use it for whatever they want to. So, but I don't know how to get across that, because it is, I think it's a big issue what we see, the polarization and the trust, and it's not only with the deep sea mining or resources, it's within everything. And it's also how things are perceived and presented in media, and it's not only social media. And so it's a big tricky question, and it's almost like social media and some of the mainstream media, whatever you want to call it, they are actually looking for angles how to polarize.
Yeah.
And we are more like, we are just sort of sitting there and consuming whatever comes out of every place, and then we try sort of to make up our minds. And it's difficult.
Getting worse?
I think it is.
I mean,
No, I'm an old man, as you can see, and all that. So everybody says it was better in the old days. But I think everything is moving so quickly now, and everything is getting binary. It's either pro or contra, and everything. And there's all the gray zones are gone. They disappear within the cracks of whatever.
Yeah. And then, I mean, you pointed to the problem of interpretation. Oh, I don't know. I want you to say more about that, because you're making the data available, and then there's this problem of interpretation. And does raw data get around that, or do you still end up with the same issue?
Yeah, I don't know. We haven't gotten there yet. So I guess so far we make our interpretation, but we are not the ones that sort of should. We make assessments of other, when it gets to concession rounds or whatever. We make interpretations and assessments of other parties' interpretation. So we are kind of the ones that are evaluating what somebody else are presenting to us, and then we try to put that into a context of the legal and the regulatory process.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, because you guys are producing some data, but you're also processing some information that's coming from other sources.
And again, that's sort of what we do when it gets to oil and gas. Everybody's applying for a license. We are the one that are doing technical evaluation of the licenses, and that's the same process that are happening in CCS, and which also might be happening or will be happening if there is a concession round and so for deep sea mineral activities. But we are not the ones that are saying and sort of that this is right or this is wrong. We are just saying that this could be that, or this could be sort of, I shouldn't like, yeah, no. So I shouldn't go dig into that too much, but that's sort of where we are.
As a interview host, I feel like anytime the guest says we shouldn't dig into that,
That's what you really want to get into. Yeah, that's a cliffhanger, isn't it?
Yeah, I would guess even more kind of abstractly about the deep sea mining conversation in general. So moving away from the Norwegian situation and these things, I would love to just ask you to just characterize the discussion of deep sea mining. What do you think are the main themes that you see people discussing in deep sea mining? And are those the right topics? Is that a good question?
I guess if I were at the university, I would ask you back, what is a good topic? You said, is that the good topic or the right topic? And then sort of, well, that's up to you. And that's sort of where we left off where I stated in the beginning. What is a good topic? And who decides what a good topic is? And if you feel that this is a good topic, should I say that no, that's you're not allowed to feel or discuss that topic? You should instead discuss this or that. So I guess that's, I think I know what you mean. But if you really want to, and I guess that's sort of we want to get out of this discussion, and that goes also back to the discussion as you actually alluded to. What is it that we really want to get out of the discussions on seabed minerals? Where do we want to go? Do you want to go anywhere, or do you don't want to go anywhere? Do you just want to discuss and in research and whatever?
In this case, the people who are listening to this podcast, from the limited amount of feedback that I get, people here have an opinion. They have a perception. They're knowledgeable enough about deep sea mining, and it seems to me that very few people come to the deep sea mining conversation without a stance. And it's interesting to wonder about where they get those stances from. Sometimes I think it's a case of, okay, I'm in this group of people and the people around me have this particular stance, and I'm going to pick that up and take it from somewhere else where we've kind of established this, and we're going to apply it now to this new field. I think I see a lot of that happening, where we have a pushback against destructive exploitation in certain aspects of society, and then here's a new domain, and so I'm going to take this framework and apply it there. I read something recently about the way that people react to trade-offs, to dilemmas. It has a lot to do with how close those dilemmas come to issues of their identity. If you identified yourself as an environmentalist, then you're going to have a much more stark, extreme stance because you want to have your stance reflect back on you. So, I mean, I can ramble for a long time about where people get their stances from, but I think that what I want to get out of this podcast is to push people a little bit on their stances and at least to expose them to the best information coming from alternative sides. So take that where you want to, but I'm very interested to have you take it towards kind of like, okay, this is help people question where their own standpoints come from, where their own narratives come from.
Yeah, and maybe that's a little bit what I tried to, where we started off. How much uncertainty or risk are you willing to take to dig yourself out of your, if you want to call it rabbit hole or your stand? But so when you say, where do the people get their information and when they make their stand, where do they get it from? And equally important, and I think that, again, I don't know if that's a psychology part, why do you get that stand from there? And everybody knows about confirmation bias. And that's the way we humans are. We love to confirm what we perceive to confirm, to put it that way. And that's, I think it's, and again, seabed mining is extremely fascinating because everybody is cherry picking their kind of, maybe opinions or whatever. And we will always find uncertainties but getting a little bit back to sort of what everybody's or a lot of people are talking about. There's a lot of discussions among the environment, the social license to operate side. So that's one sort of I shouldn't say dimension, and there's a big discussion on that. And then we have, of course, what really is where I'm started off at least, and that is the resource side. How much is it, and how do you get it out, and what kind of technology do you want to use, and how mature is that, and et cetera, et cetera. And then comes at least the third side, and that is what really has popped up lately, and you had some visitors yourself, and that's the geopolitical or strategic side. And how we see, especially minerals in general in the world, are getting higher and higher on the agenda. for different reasons, and some of them maybe not good because minerals are going into everything from guns to to et cetera, et cetera. But that's where we are. But there is one thing in all this that I think, and that's sort of, there are many sort of angles or dimensions to that could be used, and everybody's picking their angle maybe or trying to look into the other parts, but I'm not sure how much they want to get out of their own environmental side or resource side or geopolitical side, if you want to put it that way.
What do you mean by that? You're not sure how much they want to get out of their own dimension?
Because if I were, well, I'm a geologist as a background, and I could love just to investigate the resources and map it and leave it like that.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't care less about any biology or any worm or anything that lives down there. That's sort of not of my interest. And whatever the politicians are doing or whatever China is doing and so, I couldn't care less. But as a resource management institution, we in the directorate will have to look into all of that, and especially the politicians and the ministry will have to do that, and that's sort of the tricky one. And then comes the niches comes in, and somebody said, well, you will have to look more into environment, you will have to look more into strategy, you will have to look more into technology, and then we try to balance all that and say we are doing all of it. Well, you're doing too little of that or too much of that, and then comes the balance. And that's the subtle balance of resource management.
Okay, you've mentioned a couple of times uncertainty and kind of questioning how much comfort people are willing to, or how much discomfort people are willing to expose themselves to in terms of uncertainty. Say more about that.
I think uncertainty to be very, very big. So life is uncertain. Well, it's not uncertain. The only certainty we have is that we are being born and we're going to die. And then that's sort of the real extreme part. But how much do you, in one way, for some, it's sort of how much fun do you want to have in between? Because, well, you have these risk seekers that needs to jump off a cliff or whatever. And so we all have our, and again, this doesn't have all that much to do with geology or resources maybe, but it has to do with how we perceive life or society and everything. And I've seen that quite a lot, that many of us, maybe myself included, we are, to use it again, something from Pink Floyd, we are comfortably numb, all of us. That's sort of, oh, it's over. Why should I rush with this or that? I'm having a good time. I'm happy. I don't need to expose myself to uncertainty. I don't need to expose myself to the risk of jumping off a cliff. I don't need that. Somebody needs that, but I don't need that. But when it gets to these bigger decisions on resource extraction or seabed mineral activity, that is also, of course, an uncertainty. And there is a risk to it. And I acknowledge that, and everybody does. But the big question is, how much risk are you willing to take in order to investigate or to mitigate the uncertainty?
Yeah, so you've kind of presented some aspects of the deep sea mining conversation on these three different dimensions. You've got the X, the Y, and the Z axis. People can maybe imagine that. And you've got geopolitics, resources, and environment. And people like to stay in their own dimension. And I think that's, I mean, I asked this, we're talking about this, I haven't asked you the question, how do we make trade-off decisions comparing between incomparable aspects or incomparable costs and benefits? But I think that this is getting to it, is you've got, in this question, three dominant different dimensions, and people like to stay in their one dimension, and it's uncomfortable to go into a different dimension. If you're a geologist, it's uncomfortable for you to have to kind of deal with the reality of the environmental impacts. It's not just a question of geology, it's also a question of other things, and you'd rather stay in your own lane. And then on top of that, you've got the discomfort of uncertainty around, I don't know what the uncertainty, I mean, I guess, yeah, there's the uncertainty of, is there actually enough minerals here to make this worthwhile? That's
one uncertainty. Another uncertainty is how many things coming from a geology, how many animals are there or organisms, and from the social science side. So what will actually China do or US do in terms of mining and processing and so on. So and I guess that is that's the tricky one, and that is actually what we are asking our politicians and our ministries to do, is to try to weight this and make a decision out of it. And on top of all of this, and I think that's something we are missing out on, especially in Europe and in Norway as well, and I think that's something that has been discussed, and that is the timing. because the world is moving extremely quickly and fast when it gets to minerals and metals, especially, but also in other terms. And that is something that has been discussed in the, I guess you might have heard about the Draghi report and the Critical Minerals Act, and et cetera, coming out from the EU and from others. But that is sort of, as we, and I think I wrote that, so we can discuss and we can assess and we can make papers and we can disagree or not agree, but the rest of the world doesn't necessarily spend all that much time on it. They move ahead. And that is also a part of this, and that may be part of the geopolitics or strategic side, but that is part of it. And also when it gets to resources, and maybe especially when it gets to mineral metals resources, it is a long-term thingy. There's a long lead time. Even if you start digging wherever on land or somewhere today, it's going to take a long time before those minerals get into a car or a cell phone or whatever is going. So there are so many parts of these discussions, and trying to mingle it all together is, I shouldn't say it's difficult, but it's yeah.
Well, this is interesting for me because I asked this question to everybody, and obviously trust comes up a lot as a main feature of the discussion of the issue, and that came up. But I don't know how often this idea of discomfort has come up when I'm talking about this. And then you add on to the discomfort of having to get out of your comfort zone, the discomfort of having uncertainty, and then you add to that the discomfort of time and of being left behind. And then we start to get a real picture of the mess that there is in terms of the deep sea mining conversation. You see this a lot in the international situation right now with what happened with the ISA and then the metals company trying to bypass that with Discomfort. That was a time constraint. The metals company is running out of time, and the world is pushing them to, or as the world is pushing the United States administration at least to try to accelerate mineral supply chain access.
And I think exactly that is I shouldn't say an example, but that has been working with the UN system for a long time, and everybody acknowledged the UN system, and everybody, and also the Norwegian system, and maybe the European system, whatever. But and that's what I mean by the timing thing. That if we don't get out of our European bubble, the rest of the world is just going to pass us by, and maybe they have already. But that's sort of that makes it even more complicated, and it is really rough. And then sort of one might say that, well, the metals company don't trust UN, or US don't trust UN, or so who should we trust? Should we trust US or the metals company, or should we distrust them? And then it all gets into a complete mess, and nobody gets out of it. So it's, in one way, from a scientific side, I guess it's fascinating. But getting something to happen, it might not always be that fascinating, because we are maybe being lagged behind.
So then so I think we've done a fairly good job of talking about why this is a tangled mess. But where do you start to, which string do you start to pull on? What's your emphasis for the best path forward?
I think I shouldn't say I could put any string, but I think the most important thing is actually and again, going back to where we started, what do you want? What do you want out of this podcast, and what do we want out of the discussion about seabed mineral activity? And do we trust each other that we actually are willing to discuss it in an open and I shouldn't say good old-fashioned manner, instead of jumping from ditch to ditch and then just sitting there and shouting to each other? Because without that, because I could pull the resource part, and somebody, biologist, could pull the environmental and so, but that doesn't get us anywhere.
Yeah, I think you say, what do we want? One problem is we want different things. I think some people really do.
That is fair. I think that's fair.
Mm-hmm.
If you say no, I don't want deep sea mining, then well, what are the consequences of you don't want that, or if you want it, what are the consequences of that? And that also again comes back to, well, if you don't want minerals from the seabed, where do you want it from? And have you seen how the minerals are taken out today in parts of the world? And are you aware? I have used this a few times, and I think it's worth mentioning. In part of that expert group that sits in Geneva, or we meet and so, there's a lot of African countries as well. And there's a lot of mining going on in Africa. And what they are saying is that you guys in the West, you are now getting into the third wave of colonization, and you are now colonizing our minerals and metals. That is sort of what is happening. How do we do that I shouldn't say how we colonize in a good way, but how do we do that? There's a phrase, what is a just transition in terms of metals and minerals? So there are trade-offs, and if you don't want this, then you'll have to do something else. Or if you want to live in a shut in the woods, that's fine. That's your choice. But that's sort of the modern life do come with some costs, and some of those costs are the use of resources and what kind of resources are used for this and that, and you can pick that from wherever, and you can discuss recycling, and you have done that as well in parts of your podcast. But however you want to put it, we will need resources. We have needed it, and it's going to continue to be needed going forward, and it has to come from somewhere.
And so then say what's wrong with, but is it a question of, okay, either we're going to do exploitative colonization of the next kind of round of underdeveloped countries, or deep sea mining isn't the path forward to do the mining it just as best we can? Isn't that enough?
I hope that there is a way forward to doing it the best we can, either offshore or onshore, or in Africa or in Asia or so and so. And that sort of gets us back to, what do you really want? So I want to ensure that people have a good and healthy life, and then sort of you have to track it from there. And then you will probably need some copper, and you will need some nickel, and you will need some. And where do you get it from? Well, let's discuss that, and then let's. But I think that holistic part of it is something that we need to keep in mind when we discuss the mining, be it here or there or wherever. And also when it gets to other types of resources, where do you get it from, and how do you get it, as I said in the beginning?
Can you say anything? I mean, it's interesting to get any kind of insight into the discussions that are happening in this expert group on resource management. So yeah, you mentioned that there's this concern about the third wave of colonization. What are the other topics that you guys are confronted with? Where are those discussions?
Well, it's really a lot what we have. Well, one of course is the resource curse. So that's sort of an obvious one, and of course it's an environmental side. It's literally a lot the same that we have been discussing when it gets to seabed mining, and it's also about then, well, how do we get around it? What can we do about it?
Mm-hmm.
And
maybe
very
we should
often,
say, sorry, finish your
go
thought,
ahead.
and then I'll ask you. Maybe we should say what the resource curse is. I think I kind of took it for granted that the listener knows, but is it more than just that countries that tend to be kind of endowed, blessed with valuable natural resources somehow often end up not doing so well? Is there more nuance to that, or is that the thrust of the resource curse?
Yeah, I guess sort of without going into too much details, I think overall it has been shown that I think sort of 8 out of 10, or a lot of the countries that are rich in resources, especially when it gets to oil and gas and to metals and minerals, they are way down on the social development index for various reasons. And that could be corruption, that could be environmental side, that could be et cetera, et cetera. And then of course comes the question, why is it that way? They should be wealthy. And as we started off in the beginning, why did Norway get all that global pension fund, and why did we manage to handle it that way, and so and so. And of course, one of I touched upon sort of that we had the systems in place, but what is very important is that we actually have a governmental system in place that can handle the resource management. That was also very important for Norway, and I think that's something that are missing in some of the countries that are experiencing the curse, the resource curse, because they get a lot of resources, and then, well, how do we do this? How do we exploit it? How do we explore it? And how do we do it in a good way? And then, of course, somebody really just wants the money and they want to get out of there, and that's what they do.
Yeah, I think that it seems to me one of the main aspects of that is that resource money is to some extent easily come by. And so governments don't have to work very hard, and they certainly don't have to keep their populations very kind of
happy.
They don't have to be responsive to their populations. They get all of their money out of a hole in the ground. And so this creates a big disconnect between the government and the people who should be giving them a license to operate. And that's just a difficult structural aspect.
It is, and as you say, and again, I guess that sort of gets back to my phrase, comfortably numb. It's sort of, I'm happy. I doesn't care if my neighbor's not happy. I'm happy.
Mm-hmm.
I doesn't care if my people are happy. I'm, as long as I am, etc. That sort of that's a very simplified phrase, of course, but that's sort of part of it. And it sort of goes, how far out your solidarity goes, and how far out does your feelings and emotions go from yourself, kind of.
I guess applying that structural question to the deep sea mining, I think this is something that people are concerned about in deep sea mining. Yeah, with the resource curse, somebody gets control of this wealth, and it's a question of trusting them to do something with it. It's a question of trying to make them responsible to the rest of society to do something good with that. Somehow Norway, and that to me is always the part. It's like, okay, Norway did that, and then why does Norway do that? But in the question of deep sea mining, how do we trust that whoever does this is going to manage it in a good way? Doesn't it seem like it's going to be much harder than any other previous resource that we've dealt with, because it's so remote, because it's even harder to access than a gold mine in the rainforest that's out in the middle of the ocean. It's harder to keep tabs on, and there isn't an established governmental regime there.
Well, to start with the last part, I hope there is a governmental, I'm part of that governmental regime that has been established in Norway.
Mm-hmm.
So that's sort of, we hope that we have it in place, and we believe to have it in place, and then we can discuss whether if it's right or good enough, and so and so. So then that comes back to the trust part. And also when you say, well, it's way out there and it's deep water and it's harder to get to a mine in compared to the jungle in New Guinea or wherever it is, I'm not sure exactly. I've been out there quite a lot actually, and it's in one way, yeah, it's far out and it's deep, but when you get there, you get there. It's sort of, so there are again these nuances that I think it's important to get
Mm-hmm.
out there, and the third one, or I don't know how many, but that's sort of, how do you follow up on what is happening on the seabed way out in the deep seas? And that was actually also some of the discussions we had in the 60s, and when we decided in Norway to go really offshore in terms of oil and gas. That was sort of, hey, this is way out of, it's 2-hour helicopter flight out. How are you going to do this?
Mm-hmm.
Well, how should I put it? It's doable.
You do it.
It was doable. And I'm not saying that we have everything in place, and we didn't have everything in place in 1960s when we started, but that grew, and it grew, as I said, in a stepwise manner, and it grew in a sort of a step by step, hoping that it was sustainable. And I think we have proven more or less that it has been sustainable in Norway in terms of oil and gas. And then I think we also are able, hopefully, to do it when it gets to seabed mineral activities.
Okay, well, I'm tempted to let you start wrapping this up. Is there anything else that you'd like to cover that we haven't touched on?
I think we touched upon a lot, and I think also we could gone into a lot of details on technicalities on this or that. But I think all of this, that technicalities, as I call them, they doesn't really matter if you don't sort of have the faith that an open discussion and a sort of a will to discuss, and maybe also to change your point of view, given that you get enough information, if that's not in place. So I think sort of the meta learning, if you want to put it that way, is for me the most important thing of that, and getting out of myself included, the rabbit hole or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And that is not always easy, because it is very comfortable staying there.
I feel tempted to ask you about what would get you. So I think that I get the perception people who listen to this will get the message that you are pro deep sea mining in the Norwegian situation. And I think I want to give you the opportunity to kind of clarify your stance, and again, the stance of the Offshore Directorate. Like, what are you looking for? What are the things that are going to push this? And I think details are great here. Like, what specifically are we looking for to determine whether or not the government is going to go ahead in this in the Norwegian situation?
Well, first of all, you're putting myself aside. I think we're not going ahead unless the political or the parliament decides that we are going ahead. But then sort of back to, I guess, what you really are asking about is what could push me or what I'm looking for if I'm pro or not pro. I am sincerely, and I'm trying, that goes back to you guys trusting me. I am sincerely open about, I don't know if seabed mining or seabed mineral activity is going to be the next big thing. But what I am really interested in is getting to know more about it and to see whether if it is a possibility. And then, as also is written, I don't know if you have read that white paper that came out a few years back, but that's sort of what is also stated, and I'm fully in line with that. If we can't do it in a sustainable way, we're not going to do it. And then, of course, comes the discussion, well, what is sustainable? And then we can continue to discuss. But what I really think is hard is that some of the ones that are opposing seabed mineral activity, they are also opposing actually doing more data acquisition and understanding what is down there in terms of resources and in terms of the environment and in terms of impact and what kind of technology can be used. And that I think is I have many discussions and I have met many demonstrations and so on that we are against because, but then it start asking, why are you actually against? They say, we don't know what's out there. Well, let's figure out what is out there. Let's do the acquisition. Let's do the data analysis and let's then discuss. But then sort of the blinds just go down and everything is quiet. And that's where I am. And again, the Offshore Mineral Directorate are not pro or contra or anything like. Of course, we're not lobotomated or anything like that. But we are doing what we are being told by the ministry and the politicians in the parliament. And then we try as best as we can. And yes, we are being criticized, and we are probably going to be criticized from here and forever about whatever we do. And that's sort of life for us in many ways. But we are trying to do that balance between the different dimensions of what we have been discussing today.
Why do we need to open in order to do that research? This research has been ongoing for the last 20 years. Why can't we just get the universities and the offshore directorate?
Yeah, that's a really good one. And I know that you have discussed that before. And I think I sometimes used to phrase one of my previous colleagues when I used to work in oil and gas. He had been a fisherman before he started with oil and gas. He was a brilliant geologist. He was actually behind some of the biggest discoveries. Anyways, and he said, the only thing that can save Norwegian fisheries is the oil and gas industry. Because the standards and the data acquisitions and whatever they get through the work with oil and gas in Norway actually benefits the whole part of the activity in the offshore areas. And I shouldn't say that's what industry does in general, but I think that the cooperation between industry, academia, and other institutions are the way forward. And to be really I've been a scientist myself. I've been at the universities and I've been many different places and so and so. And I used to say, have you ever heard a scientist that don't want more science, that don't want more data before he writes his next paper, his next report? And usually in many years, we always used to sign off sort of the papers that we need more data. This needs to be more investigated. And there you go. And then comes back sort of to the timing issue that I mentioned. How do we move forward? And how do we challenge each other? Some of the academia would like to be challenged by industry. Some won't. I like competition. I think we managed that pretty well in Norway, actually, that integration between industry, academia, and institutions and governments.
So it's not just a question of funding then. It's not just a question that the budget of the universities and the government research organizations isn't big enough to send out enough cruises. It's also a question of distribution. It's a question of getting different eyes, different kinds of eyes, different people assessing things from different directions, and that benefit comes out of that also.
And at the base of that is the sharing of the information and the data, which again, as we talked about a little bit earlier, which is part of the Norwegian model and what we have done in terms of oil and gas and other types of resources that we are managing. And you can go into our pages on the Sokkeldirektorat or on the Norwegian Offshore Directorate. You can find loads of data. And that is unique in a global term, actually. And that is something that we hope also can be unique when it gets to seabed mineral activity. And there's a lot of data out there already.
Yeah, I guess, so just give the listener a bit more detail on that. So the Norwegian Offshore Directorate has a website you can go to, and in that find data on all of the geology that has been, all of the cruises that have been conducted so far, all of the findings.
Yeah, and
what else is there?
biology parts and all of the, I think it was referred to, and all of the reports that was behind the social, the impact assessment and et cetera, et cetera. They're all there if you wanna read it, if you care to.
I'll put links to that in the show notes so people
Perfect.
can find that easily. Where else would you send people to get information on this topic? What other sources do you think are
well, there is also actually the governmental. They actually do have a sort of a good timeline, which maybe add a little bit to what we have on our pages. So the governmental page from the Ministry of Energy, they have also written quite or a bit on the seabed mineral activity, sort of their standing. So that might be another one. That's in Norway. And then, of course, you have, I don't know if you have had any visitors from the Deep Sea Center in Bergen, but they have, of course, a homepage where you can find a lot of different parts. And then maybe from yourself, and you have had Ellefsmo and others. So there are quite a few academic institutions that also are looking into that. And then finally, if you want to go international, of course, you have the ISA, the International Seabed Authority, which has a homepage and a lot of things to dig into on that part, which is in the open waters, if you want to put it that way, outside the national boundaries or national shelves, etc.
And what about yourself? Where do people follow you if they want to hear more of your opinions and
well, I'm on LinkedIn. I guess that's maybe where I'm trying to. Sometime I'm not too active, but I'm a lot out there and giving presentations and talks and taking parts. But I guess sort of the easiest is try to, if you want to find me on LinkedIn. There are a few. Sometimes I post a little bit on that one.
Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to touch on before we sign off?
No, thanks for having me and thanks for the discussion. I think this is an important part of what really the science and the integration of resource management is about. It's trying to understand what we are doing or not doing and how we are doing it and etc. So thank you.
Okay. Stig-Morten Knutsen, thanks for being here.
Cheers.